Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm VA Winter, an indie author retelling history and classic literature with a speculative twist. And today I am doing some book recommendations because we all love books. I'm going to be talking about, as the title suggests, YA contemporary fiction today. It's not a genre I've historically read a lot of. I'm more of a fantasy science fiction person, but over the last few years I have read more. Because I think partly because that's the way the traditional market has gone, the traditional publishing market, and partly just because of my degrees, because of being at university and being exposed to different kinds of books. The first book that I'm going to talk about is The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth. I borrowed this from the library, so I don't have a physical copy. And this is a novel which is set in the 1990s. I absolutely love the atmosphere in this. It's set in small town America, and we're following the character Cameron Post, who's in the title, after her parents die in a car accident. She then lives with her conservative aunt. Her aunt moves in with her to look after her as she grows up, which is fine, except for the fact that Cameron is attracted to girls. Her aunt doesn't necessarily approve of that, and neither does the community around her. It's very conservative Christian America. So this was published in 2012, but as I say, set in the 1990s. I mean, there's two big things about this book. One is the atmosphere. It's very summer heat. It feels nostalgic in a way where, almost as if you are looking back on these, beautiful summer days that you spent as a child. And that's how it feels like when you think about looking back on summers spent growing up, exploring, out with friends and things like that. It evokes those sorts of feelings. And the other reason I think it's important is it deals with conversion therapy. It deals with what happens when conservative Christian people have to cope with a family member who doesn't adhere to what their idea of healthy and normal, in air quotes, are and is. And I think it shows quite well that, like, Cameron's aunt isn't an evil woman. She just believes differently, and she loves Cameron and she wants the best for her, but she doesn't necessarily see or understand what she's doing. It's definitely a book of its time, but unfortunately I think, these things still happen. These beliefs are still out there. These things still happen in different parts of the world, in different countries. And I think it's an important book from that point of view. And it really does show that struggle of a character learning to accept herself. Yeah, so I would highly recommend this book to anyone, really. So the second book I'm going to talk about, I think, is an important book for a different reason. And that is Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow by Siobhan Curran. This isn't a book I ever see talked about or ever see recommended. I stumbled across it because I was looking for YA fiction about working class people, poor kids, that kind of thing, specifically in the UK, when I was thinking about applying for a PhD, which I'm still planning on doing. It's just going to look a little bit different, I think. This is following two characters. One is Stevie. She's 14. Her mother's disabled, so she's disabled and can't work. So she's reliant on disability benefits, which in the UK is a whole issue which we could go on about forever. And in the book, Stevie's mother's disability benefits get cut, which is something that happens very frequently, which obviously puts them in a very difficult position financially. Stevie does her best to help, and the book is about her struggling. It's about her trying to hide her poverty at school. It's about not feeling like she can do anything or fit in because she doesn't have any money. Her life revolves around trying to earn money to help support her mother rather than hanging out with her friends or doing any of the normal teenage stuff that we expect teenagers to do. The other character is her Fitz, and he is a Syrian refugee. And these two characters kind of get thrown together in school and they get to know each other. But it's about their friendship, and it's about them understanding that they've got a lot in common despite the fact that they come from completely different worlds. They're both people who don't fit into the quote-unquote norm, which is something I really liked. It's a rare book in the sense that there aren't many books published that deal with issues around poverty for young people in the UK. It's an important thing that goes not talked about a lot. And I think that needs to change. And I also think it does a really good job of highlighting, as I said, between Stevie and her Fitz's relationship, that they've got a lot more in common than they have that drives them apart. And I think that is, again, a commentary on the British political situation. I think ultimately this is a book about hope. It's a book about overcoming. And I like that. And it was a really quick read as well. It's quite short. I don't know. I just wish more people would read this and books like it, and I wish that this would be talked about more in the same way that we talk about diversity of sexuality, diversity of race, diversity of gender. I wish we could talk about diversity of socioeconomics, diversity of class, because I think it's equally as important and it shapes who you are in a similar way. And then the next one is Loveless by Alice Oseman. This is one that I discovered because of my degree. I wrote, for my dissertation, I wrote a book with an asexual, aromantic main character. The critical bit of my dissertation, I had to say, these are other books like it, and this is a gap in the market, and blah, blah, blah. And this was the only book I could really find with an asexual main character. This follows Georgia as she heads to university for her first year. She's never had a boyfriend, never been kissed, and she desperately wants that to change. When she first goes to university, she desperately wants the so-called teenage dream. She wants to be quote-unquote normal. She discovers that she can't change who she is in so many words. She discovers the words asexual and aromantic. This isn't a concept she's come across before, but she falls into a society at university, and all of a sudden these worlds are opened up and she has to kind of figure out who she is. Again, important book for representation. It's another identity that doesn't get talked about in the same way as other sexualities do, and I think that's a shame, and I think it needs to be talked about more. So it also has female-female relationship representation in one of her friends. It's another really quick read. I got through it really quickly and I really enjoyed it. I've read pretty much everything Alice Oseman has written, and I think this is her best book. And then I have two which I'm going to give some trigger warnings for. First one I'm going to talk about is about OCD. The second one is about eating disorders. So if either of those trigger you, I will leave a timestamp for when I stop talking about OCD, and I will also leave the same timestamp for me going on to the eating disorder book. So if you don't want to hear about those, you don't have to. The first one is Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. This is obviously, as I said, a novel about OCD. We're following Asa Holmes, who has OCD, and she has it quite severely. And she's sort of trying to deal with her illness. She's obviously a teenager, going to school, having friends, etc., whilst also sort of latches on to this idea of this mystery that is in her local area of this billionaire who sort of just disappeared one day and went missing. So it's kind of like got that light-hearted storyline of Ava and her friends trying to solve this mystery, but it's also got that darker storyline as Asa struggling with her mental illness. And this is really realistic. And I know some people who have OCD haven't been able to read this because of how triggering it is, because it is really realistic. But if you want to know what it's like to have OCD, this is a really good book to read. It's probably the best representation I've found. I think the central message of the book, that Asa is more than just her mental illness, is kind of really important part of this book. Her identity is more than that, and I think that's what that second storyline kind of shows. And then the second book is the eating disorder book. So if you don't want to hear about eating disorders, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Winter Girls by Laurie Heltz Anderson. This was a book I think that was quite popular in its day. Yes, it was all the way back from 2009, and I came across it in a mental health setting, and I didn't read it until quite a few years later because I didn't think it would be a good idea for me to read it. But I did read it eventually, and I found it hard to read because it is really realistic. But at the same time, I think it does a really good job of showing what it's like to be in the head of someone with this eating disorder. So we're following Leah, who is a girl with this eating disorder, as she deals with the death of her best friend. Her best friend has died from a similar eating disorder, and it's sort of her struggle to move towards recovery. Media and things about eating disorders are really difficult because, as some people have said, they can be used as an instruction manual, which is why I think if you have an eating disorder, don't do it. It deals with the issue in a really good way, in the sense that it's made clear in the book that Leah's issues aren't just about, she isn't just attention seeking, she isn't just trying to look like a model, she's not just trying to go for some aesthetic that she's been shown on social media, even though there wasn't really social media then, but it's not about trying to look like models in magazines, on TV, on wherever. It's actually a deeper issue than that. It's not even about the food. It's about how she feels about herself. It's about the stuff going on in her own mind. It's about emotional wounds and things that she needs to deal with and heal from, not necessarily about some of the things that some people make eating disorders out to be about. And it's kind of like a bit of a ghost story as well, which I kind of liked. Leah is being haunted, literally, by her best friend. And I've also seen that people have said that Leah is an unlikable character, and yeah, she is, and that's the point. A person with an eating disorder, especially in Leah's state where it's quite severe, it's consuming, and it is all you can think about. It does control your entire life, and that doesn't necessarily make you a very nice person. So if you want to know what it's like to have an eating disorder, but if you do have issues with food, just don't do it to yourself. So those are the books that I recommend are YA contemporary. If you've read any of these books, let me know. Have any thoughts on them, let me know. If you've got any recommendations for YA contemporary that deal with important topics, let me know. Like if you like, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you next time with another video.